Good evening, Shvua Tov. May this be a good week. We are now in Chol Hamoed Sukkot. We're in the intermediate days of the festival of Sukkot. This whole week is known as the time of our rejoicing. Let's light up the darkness. Got a new candle. Let's get that wick out there. All right, who is going to join us on this lovely Sunday night as we start a new week, the week in the midst of Sukkot, the festival of our rejoicing? Pauline with us from Arkansas, James from Indianapolis, Ed from Galloway, New Jersey. Sandy says Michigan is in the house. Mark Godet from American Fork, Utah. Is that a new name? Welcome, Mark. If you're a first-timer, please let us know you're here so that we can welcome you. Amy says, love seeing all us souls from everywhere. Annie says, Michigan is in the house. Genya Bressler from New York. Lisa says, shalom from West Palm Beach. Amy is with us from Long Island. Leona says, hello, lovely friends. A cool night here in Southern Illinois. It's pretty hot here in LA, but it's cooling down now. It was hot earlier. Paul says shalom from Minneapolis. Sharon from Baltimore, Maryland. Cheryl from Oregon. Brandon says hello, Sal, tuning in from Knoxville. Keppel is saying Shavua Tov from Oklahoma. Jason from Knoxville. Ed says he just returned from the Wharf Rats Music Festival. And Binoy says, hey, bro. It'll take a little while, I suspect, for the YouTube side to catch up. No, but Marassi is with us from Atlanta. And who is that? Leonidas says Shalom Alechem, Tov Chol Moed, Shavua Tov. And he's with us from Cincinnati, Ohio. Christo catching us on YouTube this time. Hope you're having a meaningful holiday. And Lynn is saying Hag Sukkot Sameach from North Texas. All right, we've got a great daf to open up our Sukkot Talmud study with. Where are we holding? This is chapter 5 of Tractate Eruvin, the third volume of the Talmud. We're generally talking about how we shift our Shabbos boundaries so that we can walk further in one direction than another, or how we join courtyards into an enlarged private domain so that we can carry in a large area on Shabbos. All right, and so yes, on Shabbos. But now we're going to take a wonderful wisdom digression, sort of a Torah digression, and it's going to open this whole section of, it's almost like, this is almost like what you think the Talmud is before you've been exposed to the Talmud, right? If you've heard that there's wisdom in the Talmud and you really don't know what it is, you might think that it contains pages like today's page, almost like Proverbs in the Bible. It's sort of like, a place where you just find a concentration of wisdom teachings. It's not that, as we've seen, the people who've been with us since January, or even just for a month or a few weeks, you start to see that what we're doing is we're studying subjects deeply, trying to understand the law, sometimes drilling into the most granular level, to try and understand what it is that God wants from us in every situation, what is the right way to behave. Excuse me. And sometimes sort of zooming out to 30,000 feet and trying to understand what the basic principles are that are underlying these various areas of the law, from Shabbos observance to holiday observance. Later we'll get involved in the contracts that regulate business, the offerings that are brought in the temple. I mean, really every area of life will be addressed. But today, we're going to have, a series of these wisdom teachings, and they're going to hinge, they're going to be introduced by this wonderfwe character in the Talmud, one of the female sages. Her name is Beruria. And we have already met her husband several times. Her husband was the great Rabbi Meir. All unattributed Mishnas were authored by Rabbi Meir. And you would expect that somebody as great in wisdom and piety and morality and, just such an exemplary teacher, would marry somebody impressive. And oh boy, did he. Beruria, she is really just a sage and a powerhouse in her own right. We meet her today on our daf, so we're on page 54, and we're actually going to open at the bottom of page 53 here in Tractate Eruvin in the 5th chapter. And when we meet Beruria, she's not married to Rabbi Meir yet. She's actually a young woman. Her father is also a Torah scholar, the great Hananiah ben Terajan. And he, along with this scholar that we're going to meet, Rabbi Yosei the Galilean, and recall that, yesterday, the day before, on Friday, before Shabbos and Sukkot started, we were learning a little bit about how the Judeans would be a little bit snobbish in terms of the way that they used language. They would say that the Judeans are more precise in their speech, and the Galileans are a little bit more, imprecise in their speech, either because they slur their pronunciations or they're just a little bit more casual in their language. They're a little bit less formal, right? A little bit friendlier. This is not to say that there was some kind of dearth of great scholarship in the Galilee area, northern Israel. Of course there was. It's just the way the Judeans looked at the Galileans. But here we find an encounter between Rabbi Yosei the Galilean and Beruria. And she's young, and you would think that just being a young person, forget male or female, just being a young person, you would be a little bit intimidated by somebody of the stature of Rabbi Yosei the Galilean, who is a colleague of the great Rabbi Akiva. Akiva was Rabbi Meir's primary instructor. As we learned last week, he was also a student of Elisha ben Abuye, who ended up going bad. And so, he really removed himself from the Torah world. And so really Rabbi Meir's primary teacher was Rabbi Akiva. And Rabbi Yosei, who's going to meet Beruria now, is a colleague of Akiva. So this is a colleague of the great Rabbi Akiva, who eventually when she marries Rabbi Meir, she will marry a student of Rabbi Akiva. This just sets the sort of relative ages here. She's a young woman who has an encounter with this very senior and well-respected sage. So let's get into it. Rabbi Yosei the Galilean was going down a road when he met Beruria, and he asked her, "Which is the road we take to Lod?" And she said to him, "Foolish Galilean." I mean, she minces no words. "Foolish Galilean, do not the sages," she said to him, "Foolish Galilean, did not the sages say, do not indulge in excessive conversation with a woman?" This is a woman saying to one of the leaders of the sages, didn't the sages, in other words, didn't you and your colleagues say, don't engage in excessive conversation with a woman? I would say that there's definitely some subtext going on here. And it's not that she's just disrespectful and some kind of, insolent young person who's just gonna, be rude to her elders for the sake of being rude. Not at all. Perhaps what's really going on here, she ends up becoming a very accomplished Torah scholar in her own right, which is a nearly impossible feat because women were not students in the Torah academies at that time. This is 2,000 years ago. It was a very patriarchal society. And women, sadly, did not have that access that men had. They just didn't. So for a woman to learn Torah the way that she wanted to learn, I mean, she just had to find a way to learn, find teachers to teach her, show them how committed she was. In essence, do much more than a male counterpart would have had to do to become expert in Torah matters. And that is what she managed to do. So here, there's a little bit of speaking truth to the patriarchal power, as it were. It's like, you people don't talk to women. It's good that you don't just that anybody doesn't engage in, sort of casual talk if your time would be better spent studying Torah. But if you're going to say that any talk with a woman is casual talk, then you're wrong, right? That's essentially what she's saying here. But that's all a little bit beneath the surface. The way that the encounter actually goes is she says to him, "Foolish Galilean, don't you sages say, do not indulge in excessive conversation with a woman? So you should have said, instead of which is the road that we take to Lod, you could have just said, which to Lod. In other words, which of these two roads shall I go if I'm going to Lod?" Is she saying you're being a little bit flirty, trying to engage in excessive conversation? Or is she giving him a little bit of a scold, that there's women out here who would do very well in those Torah academies, and you should know that I know what the sages teach, right? She's giving him a lesson in what the sages teach, showing him that she knows. In a sense, she's sort of bageled a scholar. If you're not familiar with the term, the verb bageling happens all the time around here. It's, when you're dressed visibly as a religious Jew, and you're just kind of walking down the street and somebody says shalom to you. Sometimes it's a Jewish person who's maybe not observing the holiday or not dressed up. Sometimes it's a non-Jewish person. They just want to show you that they recognize that you're Jewish and they're trying to be friendly. That's called bageling, right? And so this is a kind of bageling, but at a higher level. She's not just showing him that she knows who he is and what he's about. She wants him to know that she has studied. Beruria encountered a certain student, right? So that's now totally separate teaching of Beruria. So we're getting another teaching of Beruria, and what's going to follow is this whole series of teachings about studying Torah, about the nature of Torah wisdom. The series could have been opened, as we'll see, with any one of the teachings that are in that series. Some of them would have made more sense for what the sages usually do. So even though Beruria is only going to appear in the first two, very few people are going to get more than one or two teachings in this list. But the fact that the editors of the Talmud chose to open the series with Beruria's two teachings is quite significant. It's the esteem in which they held her. So Beruria encountered a certain student who was reviewing his studies quietly. She kicked him. Right? Beruria does not mince words. She kicked him. She said to him, "Is the following not written in Scripture, arranged in all and secure?" That's from the second book of Samuel, chapter 23, verse 5. If your learning is arranged in all of your 248 limbs, then it is secure and will not be forgotten. But if not, it is not secure and it will be forgotten. What she's saying is, if when you're studying, you're just reading and sort of processing what you're reading with your mind, but you don't speak it with your mouth, then it'll go right through you and it won't lodge in your body. For Torah teachings to sort of take root in a person, you've got to get your body involved. The simplest way to do that is to get your lips moving, your lungs pumping, your mouth and throat, your vocal cords active, and speak the words that you are learning. You're much more likely to retain things that you've learned if you say them out loud. And I guess given the way she's phrased her teaching, that your whole body needs to be involved for the Torah to be secure in it, if you can then go do the actions that you're learning about, well, all the better, right? So this shouldn't be an intellectual exercise. At the end of the day, we're learning halachas, we're learning laws to live by, so that if you can bring them into your life and enact them and do the mitzvahs, all the better. All right, now we're going to move on to a few more lessons about this idea that you shouldn't just study Torah in your mind, that you should say it with your lips. But before we leave Beruria behind, it's worth noting that she's going to appear a bunch more times in the Talmud, and some of those stories are just so devastatingly sad. She and Rabbi Meir were an amazing, like a power couple. You can see that they were, a pair of Torah scholars who sharpened their wisdom with each other. And they had two sons who also became Torah scholars. Her father was a Torah scholar. Her father, like her husband's teacher Akiva, both of them, her father was Hananiah ben Terajon. He and Akiva, his colleague, would end up martyrs. They were, murdered horribly by the Romans in the Roman persecution. They're two of the 10 martyrs. And they weren't just executed, they were executed in the most painful way possible. Excuse me, Akiva would have his skin flayed off his body while he was alive, and Beruria's father would be burned at the stake, wrapped in a Torah that he used to teach from, and they actually put wet wool around his chest so that his heart could keep beating a little longer and he could suffer a little longer. And those are two of the stories of the martyrs that we recite at Yom Kippur, and when, that's a very serious and awful story, but we should remember, how people suffered and literally gave their lives so that Torah study could continue. And now we live in a time when we're so free and so able to share Torah, even through these digital means. Let's not take this opportunity for granted. Beruria also had the experience that those two sons of hers with Rabbi Meir, they died. They both died on the same day, and it was a Shabbos. And when her husband came home from the study hall, like they were dead already, she didn't want to ruin his Shabbos, right? Because it's just a mitzvah to take delight in Shabbos, and she didn't want to tell him right away. She figured she'd tell him after Shabbos ended. So she maintained her composure. He asked about his sons. She said they went to the study hall. He said, well, I was at the study hall. I didn't see them. She said, well, I guess he didn't see them. And, he asked a couple more times. She sort of put him off. And then he enjoyed his third meal on Shabbos. And then Shabbos ended. And then at that point, she said, will my teacher, speaking to her husband, will my teacher tell me what should one do if somebody entrusts you with their property, and then they come back to collect it? What should you do? And he says, well, obviously you return the property. And she says, well, that has happened. God entrusted us with two precious souls, and he has taken them back. And then he understood that his sons had died. And the two of them mourned together, and it was, no parents should ever have to have that experience, and only parents who've had that experience can understand it. But the way that she framed it has actually become a concept, an idea that comforts parents who are in this unimaginable position, has been used, for thousands of years since, for a couple thousand years since. God entrusts parents with the souls of their children. Sometimes he needs those souls back in heaven. We don't understand why. And we don't offer this idea to parents who've lost their child when in the midst of their grief. But if they come upon the idea, we're just there for them. But sometimes parents who know this idea in advance, God forbid this happens to them, can take comfort in that idea. Sorry to be such a bummer, but she's also got other teachings that we're going to encounter during our journey. Today is not the life of Beruria, but the important thing today is that in this whole series of wisdom teachings, the sages saw fit to have Beruria introduce them, even in such a patriarchal system as the Torah academies of the Talmudic age. All right, she had just said that if you want you to retain your Torah that you learn, make sure you say it out loud and not just read it with your mind. So on that same idea, Atana taught that Rabbi Eliezer had one student who would learn quietly. And after 3 years, he forgot what he learned because he learned it silently. And we're going to continue. And then Shmuel said to Rav Yehuda, Shinana. So this is another little bit of an insight into the way that the sages dealt with each other. So Shmuel is talking to his student Rav Yehuda. Rav Yehuda would be a great student and a more, a great sage of the Talmudic period. And he calls him sharp one, Shinana, sharp one. Right? So this was a compliment to one of his brightest students. And he says, sharp one, open your mouth and read the scripture. Open your mouth and learn the Mishnah, so that your learning will remain with you and your life will be lengthened. As it says, for they, the words of Torah, are life to those who find them and a cure for his entire flesh. Don't read this, right? So this word, hold on a second. They are life to those who find them, lemotzehem. Rather, read it as those who express them, lemotziehem. Right? So a slight different pronunciation, a slightly different spelling, and it changes from those who find them to those who express them. So Torah is an elixir of life to those who say the words, according to Shmuel talking to his student, Rav Yehuda. Shmuel also said to Rav Yehuda, Shinana, sharp one, grab and eat, grab and drink, because this world from which we must eventually depart is like a wedding celebration. He leaves it at that, and so we're free to interpret that a little bit. He might be saying, life is short. Make sure that you enjoy everything that's permitted to enjoy here. Grab and eat, grab and drink, take advantage of this world and all that it offers. That's one teaching. And then from the same way that he put it, we can also extract the teaching and make sure you learn as much Torah as possible. Don't waste time on the things that are just casual pleasures. You don't have to spend so much time eating and drinking and hanging out if you're not discussing something worthy. If a conversation doesn't lead to something of value, better you should get back to your studies. Rav said to Rav Hamnuna, my son, if you have the means, treat yourself now. Treat yourself well now, without delay, for in the grave there is no enjoyment. So that's why we have that idea again, get the most out of this world. And death does not delay. It could come suddenly, right? Tomorrow is not promised. Make sure that you enjoy today. And if you say, well, the money that I have, I don't want to spend it. I'm saving it so that I can pass it on to my children, because I'd rather they spend it than spend it on myself. So the answer to that, according to Rav, is, well, when you are in the grave, who's going to tell you whether your children have retained that wealth that you leave to them? People are like blades of grass in the field. These blades grow while those wither and die. Again, two teachings possible here. We don't know what the future holds. We don't know what the children are going to do. Make sure that you do the best that you can do with your money. Don't put so much aside and live such a frugal and unhappy existence that you don't get the most out of today. Likewise, your time to go comes. These blades of grass wither. Your children are going to get along, without you. If you've raised them to be independent, souls who have an ability to get on in this world, you don't have to feel like you have to keep taking care of them from beyond the grave. Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi said, one who travels on the road without any company should study Torah. Now here he's saying it's not just that it's going to sort of keep you from getting bored when you're traveling on the road, since you don't have someone to talk to, you're studying Torah. What he's saying is, especially in ancient times, it was dangerous to travel alone, and studying Torah, which the sages liken to sort of the value of studying Torah is equal to the value of all the other mitzvahs combined, because it makes you, refines you, and makes you the kind of person that's going to go out and do all kinds of other mitzvahs and be a benefit to your community and to the world. But also because it's so, it's such a positive in your life to study Torah. It's considered such a positive. It also protects you. It adds a measure of protection to your life. You're engaged in such an important mitzvah. Nothing is guaranteed. But if you're studying Torah, if you're engaged in a program of Torah study, if you're engaged in teaching Torah, it can protect you. It can actually protect your body from danger. As it says, for they, the words of Torah, are a gracious accompaniment. One who feels pain in his head, one who has a headache, should study Torah, for they are a gracious accompaniment to your head. This phrase, this verse, for they are a gracious accompaniment, that is Proverbs 1:9. They are a gracious accompaniment, meaning words of Torah. If you have a headache, they're a gracious accompaniment to your head. They'll help your headache. One who feels pain in his throat should study Torah. As it says in the continuation of the same verse from Proverbs, they're a gracious accompaniment to your head and necklaces for your throat. One who feels pain in his stomach should study Torah. As it says, a cure it will be for your navel. That is also from Proverbs 1:9. And one who feels pain in his bones should study Torah, as it says in the continuation of that verse, and marrow for your bones. In fact, one who feels pain in his entire body should study Torah, as it says, it is a cure for his entire flesh. And then Rav Yehuda, the son of Rabbi P'reida, will say, and this is a kind of construct that we often find in the Talmud, how unlike is the midos, the attributes, the characteristics of the Holy One compared to the midos, the attributes, characteristics of flesh and blood. Why? Because when a human doctor, prescribes medicine for a person who's sick, he gives him a medicine that, if he has an earache, the medicine is for the ear. If he has a headache, the medicine is for his head. If he has a problem with his knee, the medicine is for the knee. But when the Holy One, blessed be He, gives us a medicine, an elixir of life, it's good for the entire body. And what is that elixir of life? Torah. Torah is the elixir of life. Rabbi Zera said, a man has joy in the answer of his mouth, something in its proper time, how good it is. That also is from Proverbs. Now, what is he saying here? In addition to that, Torah is just good for your body, good for your health, good for your well-being, good for your wisdom, obviously, it also gives joy. And when does it give joy? Rabbi Zera says you get joy from your Torah study when it's on your lips and ready to go when the moment comes up in a conversation that you need it. When does a man have joy in his studies? When the answer is in his mouth to a question of law which is put to him. Or an alternative interpretation of this verse, when does a man have joy in the answer of his mouth? When something's studied in its proper time, how good it is. There is joy in studying the laws in their appropriate time. For example, right now we're in Sukkot. If you've been studying the laws of Sukkot and now it's happening around you, you've been studying the laws in their proper time. And of course, in certain situations come up all the time, the fact that you become well-versed in those laws and then you're ready to answer when people ask you. And Shabbos comes every week, and that's why and blessings come every day. And that's why, what are the first 3 volumes of the Talmud that we've been studying in our journey since January? Blessings, which come up every day, and then for the last 200 days or so, Shabbos, right? It's been all about Shabbos, right? Because Shabbos comes up every week, and there are so many laws that have to do with how we can and how we cannot enjoy Shabbos. Rabbi Yitzchak says, this idea may also be derived from here, but the matter is very close to you in your mouth and in your heart to do it. Now that's from Deuteronomy chapter 30, verse 14, right? Moses says to the Jewish people that this Torah that I'm giving you today, it's not somewhere across the sea that people should say, who will cross the sea and get it for us? And it's not on top of some mountain that people should say, who would climb that mountain and bring it down for us? The matter is very near to you in your mouth and in your heart that you should do it. And you might think that it should be in your heart and in your mouth, right? It's near to you, it's dear to you. We've said that the heart for the sages is the seat of wisdom inside the human. So you might have thought that it's like, well, you learn the Torah, it's in your heart, and then it comes out of your mouth so that you could share Torah with others. But no, it's very near to you, it's dear to you, it's in your mouth and in your heart to do it, right? You might have thought it would be in your heart, it's an idea, in your mouth you say it, and then to do it, the action. But the order is mouth, heart, action, right? Why? Because if you say these words, that's how they get into your heart so that you will become a righteous person whose actions are righteous. Okay. Rabbi Elazar talks about this same verse, that is that the words of Torah should be a gracious accompaniment and necklaces around your throat. So he says, what is the meaning of that which is written, necklaces for your throat? This teaches that if a person makes himself like this necklace, which is loose around the neck, in other words, he trains himself to be agreeable and easygoing with people. He's not a choker around other people, telling them what they should and shouldn't do like this, but rather he's like a nice loose necklace. He's available for people. Often when people are wearing necklaces, they forget that it's there, right? A choker, you wouldn't want that. But a necklace that adorns you, it's nice and loose, and most of the time you forget it's there, and every now and then you're reminded that you have something beautiful right close to your head. And a person who learns Torah should try to be like a necklace for others. Just being there for them, being ready when they need some wisdom, you're ready to share it, but you're not in their face, you're not trying to choke them, you're not like this, much more of a hug when they're open to it. One who is like that, like a necklace and not a choker, will retain his Torah. One who is unpleasant with it will have these unpleasant encounters, and over time he'll be less drawn to the Torah that he's studying, and eventually he'll forget it. So he won't retain his studies if he doesn't act like a pleasant necklace for others. And Rabbi Elazar said, what is the meaning of that which is written? That the luchos, so the luchos are the tablets of the Ten Commandments, right? So the tablets themselves are called the luchos. The luchos, what is the meaning of that which is written? That the writing of God was engraved into the luchos, into the tablets, and the word is charus. Charus haluchos, okay? Charus al haluchos. So charus, engraved. What is the meaning of engraved into the luchos? This teaches that had the first set of tablets not been shattered, the Torah would have never been forgotten by Israel. Okay, so we're talking about the written words of Torah. Recall, why were the first tablets shattered? Because Moses came down from receiving the Ten Commandments. And there we were, to our eternal shame, dancing around the golden calf. Obviously not everybody. Many people realized that this was a terrible sin and stayed back, but they weren't able to stop the people who were participating in that sin. And that's why it was a collective sin on the whole people. And Moses, in his fury, shattered those first tablets. God replaced them with the second tablets, and the second tablets were a partnership between man and God, right? Moses cut out the tablets, and then God engraved them. But the first tablets were made purely by God. And had they not been shattered, the Torah we would have been more attached to Torah, and so many of the calamities of Jewish history would have never happened, says Rabbi Elazar. So according to this exposition, the word al, which means engraved on or engraved in, here it's understood as by means of. Thus, the verse means that the writing was engraved by means of the tablets. Since an engraving is permanent and cannot be erased, by means of these tablets, the Torah would have been permanently engraved in the mind of Israel and never be forgotten by them. Having introduced that teaching of Rabbi Elazar, this is now one of my favorite teachings in the whole Talmud. Rav Acha bar Yaakov said, had the first set of tablets not been shattered, no nation or tongue would have ever had ascendancy over Israel. As it says, charus, engraved. Do not read this as it is written, charus, engraved, but as if it were written, cherus, freedom. In other words, the word for engraving, charus, very similar to the word for freedom, cherus. Very similar, just slightly different. And you can, the sages will often do this, that you can learn out a lesson, but if there was just a tiny adjustment in the spelling or pronunciation, that there's another word just sort of waiting to be drawn out there. What does it mean, freedom, right? It's a weird thing to say about the Ten Commandments, that they imply freedom. The Ten Commandments are, a rule book, like the primary rule book for the Jews, and many have extended the Ten Commandments to be the primary rule book for humankind. But it's telling you what you can do and what you can't do. Does that sound like freedom? Doesn't it sound like the opposite of freedom? That you're gonna be told by the Creator, you must do this, you can't do that? That doesn't sound like freedom, does it? Answer, yes. Yes, it does. Right? As I've been saying over and over again, to submit to God is to find freedom. One who submits to God is submitting to eternal values. As Bob Dylan says, you gotta serve someone. If you're not serving those eternal values, you're going to be serving values that you made up or that somebody else made up and which change with passing fads. And you end up getting into all kinds of trouble, and there will be no joy in it, no real deep down, lasting joy. The only way to have real joy is to be of service to others. And what's the maximum way to be of service to others in this world is to understand what people really need. To understand what people really need, you have to plug into our Creator's sense of eternal values as expressed in the Ten Commandments. And that's why they're engraved in stone and are a source of freedom. Engraved and freedom, practically the same word. Rav Mishna said, what is the meaning of that which is written, and from the wilderness to Matana? So this is a verse from Numbers 21:18. And now we're going to get a couple of interpretations of what seems one of those verses in the Torah that you would just read past and say, okay, well, there's no real spiritual teaching here. The verse in question, it just sort of delineates the travels of the children of Israel in the wilderness when we were wandering in the desert, right, during those 40 years. And among our travels, it says, and we went from the wilderness to Matana, and from Matana to Nahaliel, and from Nahaliel to Bamos, and from Bamos to the valley. Does it sound like a spiritual teaching? Now we're going to get some spiritual teachings out of that. So Rav Mishna opens this section by saying, what does it mean? And from the wilderness to Matana. So Matana has the word matan in it, which means gift. It's a gift. So he says, this teaches that if a person makes himself like the wilderness, which everyone treads upon, right? To make yourself like the wilderness, you would think, well, what does that mean? Like I'm kind of wild and savage. No. To be like the wilderness means to be like the ground of the wilderness, right? It's like the ground that no one cares about. It's the wilderness. Nobody bothers to farm it. Nobody bothers to build malls and skyscrapers there. It's just the neglected ground in this world. And the only thing that people do is walk over it. And what he's saying is you need to be humble. You need to be humble. In order to really learn great wisdom, you have to start by acknowledging you don't know that much, right? And even if you've learned a lot, there's so much more to learn. And that humility is essential for proper learning and retaining what you've learned. So he said that if a person makes himself like the wilderness, which everybody treads upon, i.e. he is humble, then he will retain his studies. But if not, he will not retain his studies. And then we get an incident that Rav Yosef had a grievance against Rava, the son of Rav Yosef Bar Chama, another Rav Yosef. So Rav Yosef, we don't even know what it was. There was an issue between Rav Yosef and Rava, and they didn't speak to each other for a long time. Rav Yosef, by the way, was blind, but he was a great, great, great teacher. So Rava didn't come to see him for a long time, but then Rava, who's one of the greatest sages in the Talmud, wanted to make amends with Rav Yosef, and he came to visit Rav Yosef, and he found Rav Yosef's student mixing his wine, probably to make the Kiddush. I don't know if it's for the Kiddush. Oh, I'm sorry. When the day preceding Yom Kippur arrives, so it's the meal before Yom Kippur. Very good. So Rava wants to make amends with Rav Yosef right before Yom Kippur. And he comes and he finds him about to have that meal, and his student is mixing the wine for him. This is something we don't do nowadays, right? When we have wine, well, we open the bottle and pour it in the glass. But in those days, wine came in barrels, and it was sort of 3 or 4 times stronger than the way you would want to drink it. And so there's a bit of an art form of diluting it exactly the right amount and in the right way. And Rav Yosef's student was in the process, was about to do that, to mix Rav Yosef's wine for him. And Rava, who the student, of course, recognized immediately as the great Rava, comes in and he says, let me mix the wine for my master. Rava mixes it. He brings it in to Rav Yosef, puts it in front of him. Rav Yosef is blind. He doesn't see who brought it in, but he picks up the wine and tastes it. And he remarks, this mixing, in other words, the proportion of wine to water, is like the mixing normally performed by Rava, the son of Rav Yosef bar Chama. And Rava said to him, it is I. And Rav Yosef said, well, do not sit down until you have explained these verses to me. What is the meaning of that which is written? And from the wilderness to Matana, and from Matana to Nachaliel, and from Nachaliel to Bamos, and from Bamos to the valley. And Rava had an answer for him. And it's a beautiful answer. And this is one of those little passages similar to, from Shakespeare, As You Like It, these are the ages of man. All the people have their entrances and their exits, their acts being 7 ages. At first, the infant mewling and puking in his nurse's arms. And so it sort of does the journey of a person from student to old man. This is the journey of one who is learning Torah, according to Rav, as he's expressing it before Rav Yosef when he's coming to make amends. And Rava answered him, if a person, from the wilderness to Matana, if a person makes himself like this wilderness, which everybody treads upon, i.e. he is humble, then the Torah is given to him as a gift, a matan, a gift. And then it says, and it's given to him as a gift, and the Almighty makes it his inheritance. A person who is humble will be blessed to learn Torah, and then the Almighty will take note of him and make it his inheritance, like it'll really come into him, not just be exposed to it. And then the Almighty makes it his inheritance. And from Matana, the gift, to Nachaliel, an inheritance by God. Nachaliel is an inheritance from God, right? And once the Almighty makes it his inheritance, he rises to greatness, which we get from Nachaliel, an inheritance by God, to Bamos. Bamos means heights. So a person who learns Torah and then really, gets that Torah inside of him, like it becomes an inheritance from God, rises to great heights in our society, or at least in their society. But having risen to those heights, if the person becomes haughty, the Holy One, blessed is he, brings him low, as it says, and from Bamos to the valley. But if he repents of his haughtiness, the Holy One, blessed be he, raises him up again, as it says, every valley shall be raised. Now the story ends there. It doesn't say what happened between Rava and Rav Yosef, but I think Rav Yosef was saying, explain this verse to me, knowing what it meant, and he wanted Rava, who would also know what it meant, to say it out loud in his presence. And in saying it out loud, he's sort of recounting their relationship, right? Rava learned a lot from Rav Yosef. Because he learned so much, like his Torah became like an inheritance from God within him. He rose up. He became the great, prominent, esteemed scholar Rava. Maybe he was somehow haughty in that and wasn't as attentive as he should have been to his former teacher, Rav Yosef. So he was humbled. He came down. But from that humbling place, you can make a teshuvah. You can make an atonement. You can atone for being haughty and go and be humble again, as he did when he came back before his teacher. Rabbi Chia bar Abba said, in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, what is the meaning of that which is written, he who guards the fig tree shall eat its fruit? Torah is so often compared to water. That's a very common comparison. And a tree of life, that's another one. Here, it's a fig tree. Why a fig tree? This is a very nice image. A fig tree is the kind of tree that it at all times has fruits in various stages of ripeness, right? Some trees, it's like, they get the whole load at some point in the season, and then everything gets harvested, and then, it's just, there's not going to be any more fruit to gather there till same time next year. But other trees are sort of always productive, and the fig tree is like that. So anytime you come to a fig tree, you can look around and you'll find figs that are perfect, just ripe, just ready. Likewise, Torah. Anytime you engage in Torah study, anytime you go into the Bible looking to learn, anytime you engage in any of the aspects of our Torah tradition, you go in digging, you will find a pearl that applies to your life at that moment as if it was grown and designed for you. Right? But you got to go looking for it. You got to approach the tree. You got to look for that ripe fig. If you do, you will always find it. Okay, and so we've been talking, I mean, what is the Talmud? The Talmud is the kind of rendering on the page of the oral law. Initially, it was only an oral law. And as we've said many times, it was initially set down. Its kind of briefest, most coded version was the Mishna around the year 200 of the Common Era. And then eventually the Gemara was set down. That's really the Gemara, and the Mishnah is the Talmud, and that was set down around the year 600. And then since then, commentators have been adding to it, the Geonim, and then the Acharonim, then the Rishonim, and then the Acharonim. So the commentators of the, from like the next 500 years, like sort of from around the year 600 to 1000, 1100, and then from like 1100 to the 1500s, and then from the 1500s to the present day. And that's why it has swelled to, in the Art Scroll version, 73 volumes. But the core of the oral law, the initial teachings, did come from God to Moses at Mount Sinai. So God dictated the written Torah to Moses, and God dictated the essential core teachings of the oral law, which would, of course, grow, but which sort of initiated the process of the oral law. Why was the oral law so important? Because the written law would need a kind of process for elucidating and learning out from it as the world would keep changing. God knew that the world would keep changing. God knew that the world of 2020 would be so alien to the people who lived 3,000 years ago. They could never recognize our world. The laws that were given then had to be as applicable to their world as to our world. And how could a written document remain so relevant over 3,000 years? Because there would be a procedure, a process for learning out teachings from it. And so the initial core teachings of the oral law were given at Mount Sinai. How were the core teachings of the oral law given at Mount Sinai? That's what this next passage is about. The rabbis taught in a Beruria. What procedure was followed in the teaching of the oral law? Moses learned from the mouth of the Almighty. Aaron entered the tent of Moses, and Moses taught him his portion. Aaron moved aside and sat to the left of Moses. Why did Aaron sit to the left of Moses? Because if two people are standing or sitting next to each other, the one who is more prominent in whatever way that they would determine is prominent sits to the right. So in other words, if I'm sitting next to my teacher should be on my right, I should be on his left. The sons of Aaron entered, and Moses taught them their portion, the same portion he had taught Aaron. The sons of Aaron moved aside. Eleazar sat to the right of Moses, and Itamar sat to the left of Aaron. A dissenting view, Rabbi Yehuda says, actually Aaron got up at this point and moved to the right of Moses because he's senior to the sons. At any rate, the elders then entered, and Moses taught them their portion. And then the elders moved aside, and then all the people entered. So either we're talking about some kind of mystical tent that could somehow expand, almost like from, like a Harry Potter world, so that the 2 million people who are outside in the wilderness could all enter that tent, Or perhaps they're saying that they, shifted outside so that Moses and Aaron, so Aaron the high priest, his sons, Eleazar and Ithamar, the priests, and then the elders, the 70 elders that had been appointed to be the elders, they would all now join the whole community. And then Moses would teach to all of them this same teaching. So he received the law from God. He taught it to Aaron. Then he taught it to the sons of Aaron. Then he taught it to the elders. And then he taught it to all the people. Okay, then the elders entered, Moses taught them their portion, and then all the people entered, and Moses taught them their portion. As a result, each portion was heard at this point by Aaron 4 times. Right? Aaron heard it 4 times. He heard it when Moses taught it to him, and then Aaron heard it when it was taught to his sons and to the elders and to the people. By his sons 3 times, by the elders twice, and all the people once. Then Moses left, and Aaron taught what he had learned to everyone present. Then Aaron left. And then his sons taught their portion to everyone present. And then his sons left. And the elders taught their portion to everyone present. And as a result, each portion was heard by everybody 4 times. And from here, Rabbi Eliezer inferred that a person is obligated to repeat each lesson to his student 4 times. And this may be proven by a Kal V'chomer argument. Now, if Aaron, who learned directly from the mouth of Moses, who was the most superior teacher because Moses had learned from the mouth of the Almighty directly, then an ordinary person who learns from the mouth of an ordinary person, how much more so is it necessary for him to hear it at least 4 times? Rabbi Akiva says, from where do we know that a person is obligated to repeat each lesson to his student until he knows it? Right, minimum 4 times. But because that's because they heard it directly from Moses. But if you're not Moses, you may need to hear it more times from your teacher. Rabbi Akiva says you need to repeat a lesson as often as necessary so that your students learn it. How do we know that? As it says, and teach it to the children of Israel. That's Deuteronomy 31:19. And from where do we know that he must repeat each lesson to his students until it is fluent in their mouths? As it says in that very verse, put it in their mouths. And from where do we know that a teacher must teach his student the reasons for the commandments wherever possible? As it says, and these are the judgments which you shall put before them, from Exodus 21:1. If you're putting the judgments before them, it's so that they can understand it. And let all of them, so now the Gemara suggests, well, was this really necessary to have everything taught 4 times in this elaborate procedure of God teaches Moses and Moses to Aaron and Moses to the children, etc., and everyone hears it 4 times? Why not just have, and let them all learn 4 times from Moses? Why not just have all of them sit in front of Moses and Moses just teaches it 4 times? Why do they come in one at a time? And the Gemara answers that Aaron and his sons and the elders were afforded the opportunity to participate in the teaching, that they would hear it and then repeat it over to the people and the ones in front of them, in order to bestow honor upon Aaron and his sons and honor upon the elders. The Gemara asks why a different procedure was not followed. Okay, and so let Aaron go in and learn from Moses 4 times. Why not have Aaron Moses teaches it to Aaron, he repeats it 4 times. Then Aaron goes to his sons and he teaches them 4 times. And then the sons teach it 4 times to the elders. Why not do it like that? And the Gemara answers, well, since Moses had learned from the mouth of the Almighty, the teaching process is certainly enhanced with his personal participation. So this was the perfect, what's the word I'm looking for? This is the perfect combination of having Moses participate, but not making it all about Moses, right? Okay, so the Gemara quotes from the Baraisa. That Rabbi Yehuda says, actually, Aaron got up at this point and moved to the right of Moses, since they argue a little bit. Did he actually get up and move to the right, since a more senior person belongs on the right? When there's 3, right? If 3 people are walking down the road, then the most senior goes in the middle, and then the second most important goes to his right, and the third most important goes to his left. So when there's only 2, he should be on the right. The teacher should be on the right. So that's why when Aaron was first taught and came in, it was just him and Moses. He sat on Moses' left. Then his sons came in, and the question was, did he trouble to get up and then move over and sit on the right? And so there's a disagreement. Eliezer says he did. The sages say, no, he didn't. Why trouble Aaron, who is dignified enough that he doesn't have to, get up and move for the purposes of etiquette? But for our purposes, you should know that if you're walking down the street, just you and your teacher, he should be on your right. And then if there's going to be an important person and more than that, then his primary student is on his right and his second most important student on his left. And now this is going to be the last teaching for tonight, and then I'll get to comments and questions. So Rabbi P'reida had a student to whom he would have to repeat each lesson 400 times before he understood it. And one day Rabbi P'reida a message came to him in front of his student that he was needed for a mitzvah matter, right? Rabbi P'reida needed to go somewhere to officiate at a bris, or he had to do something for the community that required his presence on a mitzvah matter. And then he said, well, I'll be right there, right when I finish my lesson. And then he had this student who was, this student was a little bit challenged and he needed to hear things 400 times before he would absorb it. So the teacher stayed with him and taught that day's lesson 400 times. But the student didn't grasp it. So Rabbi P'reida said to him, well, why is that normally when I teach you something 400 times you get it, but today I taught it 400 times and you didn't get it? And the student said to him, I was very distracted because once I heard that you were needed by the community for that mitzvah matter, I was thinking that at any moment you might get up and leave. And it distracted me, and I guess I didn't absorb it because of that. So Rabbi P'reida said, I'm going to stay here as long as it takes for you to learn the lesson. You need not worry. And then he taught it another 400 times, and then the student grasped it. And then Rabbi P'reida went to do whatever it was necessary for him to do. A heavenly voice emanated and asked Rabbi P'reida, do you prefer that 400 years be added to your life, or that you and your generation merit the life of the world to come? Rabbi P'reida replied, that I and my generation merit the life of the world to come. The Holy One, blessed be He, said to them, the angels in heaven, give him both, this and this. So that's the end for today. But that's a lesson of what a great Torah teacher is. Somebody who will, sort of custom fit the teaching to the needs of the student, will stay with the student. I mean, obviously this is a lesson, not just Torah teaching, all teaching. But, if possible, and resources are thin, not everybody can do this. Obviously, it's a great luxury to have that much time with a student. But if possible, do everything that you can for your students, including repeat something 400 times if that is what they need. And God in heaven looked at this man, this teacher was so dedicated to his student, and he said, tell him that he can have his choice. Either he can live an additional 400 years, or in his merit, he and his entire generation will earn a place in the world to come. And of course, Rabbi P'reida, who's dedicated to other people, instead of choosing an extra 400 years of life for himself, said, oh no, that our whole generation should merit a place in the world to come. And of course, for making that good choice, God says, give him both. That's the end of that story. I don't know where Rabbi P'reida is, but I'd like to meet him. Maybe he's still around. All right, let's see if you've got some comments or questions for me. Susan Newman Stormont says, I find it very interesting to read aloud so as to retain what is read. Thanks for that. As I was reading this page yesterday during Sukkot, and by the way, so now we're 2 pages behind the Daf Yomi schedule. And I thought we're going to catch up at least 1 page pretty soon, but this was not the time to do it already. There were so many valuable teachings here. But pretty soon we've got some short pages coming up, and so we'll double up then. But at any rate, as I was learning yesterday, I said, well, sometimes I do this silently. I take notes. Like the way that something gets into me is when I write it out by hand. That I've always found there's like some kind of like a chemical thing in my body that when I write it, it really gets into me. So it's maybe the same idea as what Beruria was saying. You have to have your whole body involved. And when you're writing or when you're speaking, it's much more than if you just read. But at any rate, having read this, I started reading it aloud. And it was great, and I actually ended up reading this page twice aloud from the Koran Talmud and from the Art Scroll Talmud. And it was great to do that because it really brought home the sort of different approaches of the editors of both. And, it's obviously a luxury if it's possible, but when possible, it is good to read the two different translations. You really get a lot out of it, and especially if you read it out loud. Sharon Frant Brooks. That does not make sense to me. Okay, what are we talking about? Because man had to do action to cause the second set of tablets to come into being. If doing something strengthens learning, the second set should be a more effective way to learn the content. That's a really good point, Sharon. I mean, one human was involved, right? So Moses carved the tablets. We weren't, but you could say, okay, but he was there as our representative. And in a sense, the fact that the Jews have had such a difficult and tragic history, right? This is a somewhat metaphorical teaching. I mean, we don't know, right? We certainly don't know. The sage who was expressing this idea, is it hermeneutical? Is it exegetical? It can't just be true. I don't know how he could know that for sure. It's an idea. I think what he's saying is if we hadn't sinned at that very moment, we might have maintained that incredible level that we had in the wilderness, where it says that, the most average person who crossed the Sea of Reeds as we left Egypt had a vision, a prophecy, a level of prophecy that was higher than the prophets in the Bible, right? It wasn't just that the waters parted. When they walked through the Sea of Reeds, it was like, and the whole time they were in the wilderness, it was like God was present, right? He was present. There was a manifestation of God, that pillar of cloud, pillar of fire. It wasn't just like a nifty looking pillar of cloud. They were in a world where the veil had been completely pierced, and they were simultaneously living in the physical world and in Gan Eden, in God's spiritual world. And if they had been able to sort of stay at that level, that would have been their starting point. And from there, they would have climbed so much higher in all the Torah that we could have learned since. But like Adam and Eve, we blew it immediately, showing that we weren't ready to live at that level. And maybe God knew that was going to happen. I mean, God knows everything. So, okay, he showed us that you could have had it that way, but that's not your nature. So you're going to have to learn these lessons over thousands of difficult years. And maybe you're absolutely right, Sharon, that we needed these thousands of difficult years to learn these lessons in a deeper way. Who knows? Who knows? Pam, when the second set of tablets was carved out by man, then we had an investment, right? It's the same idea. Very good. And Lynn says, Rabbi P'reida reminded me of what happened to Solomon. He asked for wisdom to rule for Israel's benefit, and Hashem, right, so he had a dream. How did it happen exactly? So he was given a choice, right? He could have anything he wanted. He was at such a high level. And God said to him in this dream, so you could have, unlimited wealth, unlimited honor, or unlimited wisdom. And he said, well, I'll take wisdom because I'm going to be the king. That's going to benefit my people much more than if I have unlimited wealth and honor. And then God said, you've chosen well, and I will give you both. So very good there, Lynn. All right. That's what we've got for us this evening. We should all be blessed that this Sukkot. Now, Sukkot, by the way, Sukkot, right? Just a different way to pronounce the same word. This holiday is the most universal of holidays, right? If you're not Jewish, you're included in Sukkot. You don't have the same obligations that a Jew has. You're not obligated to get a palm branch and a citron and esrog and wave them every day and recite Hallel and take your meals in a sukkah in the driveway, etc. But this holiday is understood to be like a foreshadowing of the Messianic age, when everyone will be dwelling together in peace. And even in ancient times, this is the holiday in which all these sacrifices were brought, the 70 bulls of Sukkot, representing the 70 nations of the world. Everyone is included in this holiday. May it be truly a festival and a time of rejoicing for you and all your loved ones. All the best.